Two voices, each dripping with blood disguised as memory. Ed Kemper, the gentle giant of horror. Dennis Rader, the killer who named himself. Listen closely and shiver.
Picture this: a giant of a man, articulate and composed, describing how he killed his own mother and why it felt like finishing a painful assignment.
An upbringing that was some have called dysfunctional. Okay, parents divorced when I was young.
Or another man standing before a judge, detailing multiple murders as if he's giving an operational update.
No, that was part of my, my what you call fantasy. These people were selected.
It's that dissonance, the clinical tone paired with monstrous acts, that traps our attention. This video explores the recorded recollections of two of America's most notorious serial killers, Ed Kemper and Dennis BTK Rader. Ed Kemper, the gentle titan who lectured on murder. Edmund Emil Kemper III, born December 18, 1948, earned a place in true crime infamy by murdering 8 female college students in Santa Cruz, California, during 1972 to 1973, after murdering his grandparents at 15. His final victim was his mother, along with her friend, in 1973. His crimes, chilling in themselves, are made more disturbing by the way he recounts them, with precision and a surprising lack of emotional affect. In a 1984 jailhouse interview, Kemper spoke with a low, steady cadence.
I believe I'd be married, I'd have children, I'd be heading toward my first grandchildren.
Narrating his actions almost as if they were clinical case studies rather than horrors. When asked why he finally decided to confess, he replied that the murders simply weren't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose anymore, adding that he called it all off. That phrase, so ordinary, so devoid of drama, feels like a knock at the door of the impossible, jolting the listener into an unsettling clarity. His explanation wasn't a plea for help, nor a confession forced by guilt. It was a calm, rational closure.
She had terrible pain from her life, earlier life, her upbringing, a failed marriage with my father.
Even more revealing is an earlier tape from April 28, 1973, recorded just after his arrest at the Santa Cruz County Jail. In that session, Kemper is already cooperative and articulate. He answers every question with an unnerving thoughtfulness.
Young, my mother started drinking heavily. She was working to raise 3 kids. We were not being cooperative about it.
Framing his own pathology with a disturbing detachment and a readiness to dissect his own motives. The notion that a man capable of such violence could hold himself up for scrutiny like this, so calmly, so methodically, is what turns these interviews into lessons for profilers and nightmares for casual viewers. Reliable true crime writing and analysis use these tapes to demonstrate how offenders can use narrative control to manipulate perception, controlling not just their actions, but how those actions are understood. Recently, Kemper's name reemerged in parole board coverage. In July 2024, California's Board of Parole hearings unanimously denied his request for release. Local media and the official state calendar confirm he was not present, and the board cited his past as well as unresolved psychological concerns. So despite decades passing, release is repeatedly deferred, a reality check that monstrosity isn't a chapter that ends on time. Dennis Rader, the churchgoer who became BTK. Dennis Lynn Rader, born March 9, 1945, cultivated the image of a respectable family man in Park City, Kansas. He was a devoted husband, a father of 2, president of his church council, and a Boy Scout troop leader. To neighbors, he seemed dependable and ordinary, a man who took pride in order and appearances. Yet beneath that veneer of suburban normalcy lurked a methodical killer who called himself BTK, an acronym for Bind, Torture, Kill. Between 1974 and 1991, he carried out 10 murders, targeting men, women, and children with terrifying premeditation. His crimes were punctuated by letters to police and local news outlets, taunting investigators, describing his murders, and giving himself the kind of branding that would make him infamous.
Well, I had did some thinking.
For decades, he eluded capture with his communications, both baiting law enforcement and feeding his own need for recognition. When Rader was finally arrested in 2005, thanks in part to a computer disk he had foolishly mailed to a television station, the carefully constructed facade collapsed. In June of that year, during his plea hearing and sentencing, the world watched in astonishment as he described his murders with the same tone one might use to summarize errands.
I had did some thinking on what I was going to do to either Mrs. Otero or Josephine.
He recounted binding the Otero family in 1974 and later strangling young women and mothers, yet did so without visible remorse or even emotion. His delivery was disturbingly flat, each detail rendered in a voice devoid of humanity, as though he were reciting the minutes of a church meeting. Reporters from the Wichita Eagle and national outlets remarked that the most horrifying element was not his words, but the bureaucratic cadence with which he spoke them. His apology to the victims' families, intended to display contrition, was criticized as grandiose and hollow, with one judge comparing it to an Academy Awards acceptance speech. It seemed rehearsed, almost theatrical, yet profoundly empty. One of the most unnerving aspects of Rader's self-presentation was his use of the phrase Factor X. He described this as a kind of supernatural compulsion, a dark force within him that drove him to stalk, bind, torture, and kill. By coining this term, Rader gave his crimes a pseudo-scientific framework, as if he were naming a psychological principle rather than taking ownership of his brutality. In reality, it was another extension of his need to control the narrative. Factor X functioned less as an explanation and more as branding, a way of making his murderous impulses sound inevitable, almost fated, and thereby distancing himself from the moral weight of his actions. Documentaries and A&E's BTK Confession of a Serial Killer have since highlighted how Rader used language not only to justify but to market his pathology, just as he used the moniker BTK to ensure his crimes would never fade into anonymity. The paradox of Dennis Rader is that he thrived on organization, order, and appearances. Yet his deepest fulfillment came from dismantling the lives of others in the most chaotic, cruel ways possible. His courtroom confession remains one of the most chilling on record because it revealed not only the details of his killings, but also the chilling efficiency of his persona. He was the killer who blended into the pews, the neighbor who lent you his mower, the scout leader who taught your son survival skills, all while hiding the double life of a man who kept meticulous records of his crimes. When the mask finally slipped, the quiet, methodical tone of his words suggested something perhaps more terrifying than rage. A man who killed not in frenzy, but in order. When new clues raise, old questions. Even though Dennis BTK Rader sits behind bars for life, the public's and investigators' interest in his crimes continues to burn brightly, driven by the possibility that unsolved cases may yet be linked to him. In 2024, a startling development reignited the investigation into the 1976 disappearance of 16-year-old Cynthia Dawn Kinney from Osage County, Oklahoma. Authorities re-examined a word puzzle that Rader had mailed to a Kansas TV station in 2004. This re-examination revealed names and terms like Cindy, Kinney, laundromat, Pahuska, and Kihika, the street where the laundromat was located, embedded in the puzzle, terms that directly correspond with Kinney's disappearance. Sheriff Eddie Verdon received the puzzle in April 2024, accompanied by a note urging, "Don't view it as a puzzle. View the puzzle as a map that Rader created to plot his victims." Investigators have since formed a national BTK task force dedicated to Kinney's cold case, combing through Rader's archived writings, old residences, and potential crime scenes. They notably searched his former property in Park City, Kansas, uncovering items of interest such as tangled pantyhose and complex carvings in nearby barns. These artifacts, while suggestive, remain circumstantial. Despite the chilling coincidence of those words and Rader's known pattern, he often struck mid-morning, which aligns with the time Kinney vanished from a laundromat. The authorities have emphasized that there remains insufficient evidence to file criminal charges. Still, the investigation has intensified. The word puzzles coded clues combined with Rader's territorial knowledge of Kinney's disappearance locale and his own behavioral patterns have made this one of the most unsettling possible links to a case that had remained frozen in time for nearly 5 decades. Lessons from the silence. What should alarm us more? The philosophical dissection of murder or the procedural summation of carnage? Both men speak in tones that don't belong with their deeds. A calm that somehow slicks over violence, a polite register that makes murder feel ordinary. Their voices aren't unreliable, they're deliberate, trying not just to tell us what they did, but how they want us to interpret it. That's why those recordings remain central to criminal psychology. They train us to focus on how monsters narrate themselves. Kemper intellectualizes murder, explaining it like control gone unchecked. Rader sanitizes atrocity, filing it as part of a career. Both men invite us in, but only to expose the cunning with which human voices can lie. And that's where we'll leave this deep dive into the haunting words of Ed Kemper and Dennis Rader. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to hit that like, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, evil doesn't always sound like you think it should.
Their words are cages, built to hold their pride. Confessions not for forgiveness but for power, and every word another nail in the coffin of innocence.